Hey everyone, just give it a few more seconds and then we'll kick things off. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is the December delivery team's AMA. So we're responsible for deployments and releases to self-managed users. So we will kick off. We've got a few of the team with us today, so looking forward to having some interesting conversations. Victor, we may summarize your points in interest of time and take this async, but would you like to please verbalize your incredible question?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to have feedback on these questions async as well, but would love to hear your thoughts about this. So the question is that if you have rainbow colored ponies and anything you can wish for, how would you design GitLab.com deployment pipelines in that amazing situation? That's the question, because I know what we do today. I asked that 2 months ago. So the next question is, what if you can build up from, you don't have to use anything, you don't have to dog food, no restrictions apply. What tools would you use? What process would you use? What metrics would you track, etc.? And all those things. And before the call, I just had Henry's last comment in 1.f, and that I just highlight, even like questioning even that, like, why do you want a long pipeline in the first place?
Yeah, over to you, Henry. Give us your rainbow colored dream.
Yeah, maybe the first answer to point A, what I would like for driving principles, and the one thing that came to mind for me is if we could split up our GitLab deployments into very small pieces, like small services that we deploy independently. That would be, of course, a big change for us to deploy GitLab.com. But of course, there are reasons why we are not doing this, and they are valid. Like, we want to have this monolithic application, and we also want to test the packages that we deploy to our that we give to our customers. And so we want to deploy in lockstep all the things together. So, but if that could be changed, that would be a big change for the way of speed of to get something to production, for instance, and meantime to production and things like that. So that would be one dream if I could ask a rainbow-colored unicorn. And to your UI question, yeah, of course, having a long pipeline maybe wouldn't be that great, but on the other hand, having a lot of stages and a lot of insight into what exactly is going on is helpful. So why not displaying it, right? At least we have these cases now. And so sometimes it's not really nice to scroll through a lot of jobs and a lot of pipelines, especially if we want to publish and create new packages, for instance, and things like that when we do a new release. So just turning around, scrolling from top to bottom instead of left to right, that would be nice for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just add on there, I think very similar to kind of what Henry's already said, that like for me, kind of fast, safe, automated are kind of the things to keep working towards. The faster we can get changes out there, the better for everyone, but particularly the better it is for us to be able to recover from incidents. So at the moment, that's our sort of super big pain point. Like, I think we can build processes around expecting a code change to take like a number of hours to hit production, but it's less good when it's an incident that we're trying to recover from. So the faster that goes, the easier things get. The more we can run in parallel, the faster those things go. So can we run tests in parallel? Can we run deployment stages? So all the things to try and avoid us kind of having to wait on things as we go through the process.
Thanks. I'm digesting still your answer, but I have a question for Henry already. Like,
just sorry to interrupt you, Victor. Like, could we would you mind putting these down like below the other questions, just so we can kind of get through to standard? Go ahead with this one, but for the future ones, like, can we put those down on the future numbers?
Yeah. So I will move now to the bottom, and we can move on to the other questions.
Okay, awesome. Great. Were there any other bits that any other delivery people wanted to call out as their rainbow colored dreams? No? Okay, great. That's a great question. Thanks, Victor. Stan, over to you.
Sure, it's hard to follow rainbow colored dreams, but I'll try. Congratulations on the migration to GitLab Pages. I heard that went well. Was there any surprises that came out of it?
Excuse me. There was a mild surprise that I ran into, and Jason Plum helped me with this. This was something that occurred prior to us migrating. It was during testing. I personally did not know that Pages served artifacts, and the route in which Pages serves that artifact was a little interesting to learn, because we reach out to Rails, which redirects to Pages, which redirects itself to Rails to perform the authentication and retrieve the actual object. And just learning about that was a little goofy. And I know there's reasons behind it, but that was kind of surprising to me. But outside of that, Pages was a very quick and easy service to migrate. It just took a little longer because of holidays and KubeCon and a few other things. But it turned out to be one of the more fun, easier projects to migrate, which was kind of cool.
I think the prerequisite is that it had to support object stores, so you didn't have to worry about. So there was a lot of work that went before that.
Precisely. Having that knocked out well beforehand was very helpful.
Cool. And along the same lines, I know you're undergoing the Redis migration. How's that going? I heard there was some password thing that came out of it, but in general, like, what do you think of it right now?
I wish Sean or Igor was on this call, because they've been doing a little bit more work on this than I have so far. But yeah, so we're trying to figure out a way to utilize the same Helm chart that we utilize within our existing Helm chart. And currently there's a few little goofy items related to how that particular Helm chart works that's causing us a little bit of grief. One of them is regarding authentication. So Sentinel, or in that particular Helm chart, when you set a password, you set it for both Sentinel and Redis. Currently, I think, if I remember correctly, our application doesn't support using a password on Sentinel, but does support using a password for Redis, or might have that backwards, I can't recall. So that's one blocker. And then the other one is related to how to access applications. If we run Redis inside of Kubernetes, how do we access Redis by applications that are not running inside of Kubernetes? And for .com, in our particular case, we're going to have applications that run in other clusters that will need to talk to a Redis cluster that may exist inside of a different Kubernetes cluster. So there's a few challenges that, and there's a few open issues inside of the Redis Helm chart itself about how to address this. And we're still trying to work on our best way to figure that out currently. So it's still a work in progress at the moment.
Thanks.
Well, I'll say, John and team, let me know about this whole Redis Sentinel password thing, because I know we tested that. So we'll have a look at it if you just point us in the right direction.
We'll pull the issues. And some of this is very experimental, because we are making sure we want to test out how multiple Redis instances work, as well as actually just figuring things out for rate limiting, which is the specific one we're working on right now. Awesome. Thanks for asking that, Stan. Greg, over to you.
Hi, everyone. So in support and in the community forum, I've seen an uptick in customers and community users requesting that we backport some of the more severe security vulnerability patches for those to the 13.12.x series. Currently, our security patch release policy is only for the current release and the 2 previous minor releases. So just curious, what amount of effort and work would it take, and what challenges might there be if we were to move to backport major security patches to the previous major release instead of just the 2 previous minor releases?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So the further back we go, the more work it is to apply these backports, right? Because we're taking a code change and we're having to go back a long way. Lots of things have changed in the meantime. So it's increasing amounts of work, and particularly as we go beyond, back beyond breaking changes, like the work, becomes more complicated. The big things we've seen on recent backports is keeping stable branches around. We have a lot of test changes, and that makes it quite hard to get branches passing. We also don't maintain environments for past releases. So actually having somewhere where we can put a package and test it means there's quite a lot of work. There was quite a lot of manual work to get things installed somewhere involving quality to actually be able to kick off tests. So it is a lot of work. And Marion has already been writing down some of this stuff. So Marion, do you want to bear blights?
Well, this is just sharing the link to the product issue where we're discussing some of these things from a non-technical side. So what kind of things do we need to do in order to actually support this effort, and whether we want to do it? So this is where we discuss with product sales and other parts of the org whether we absolutely need it. The original discussion that was led a couple of months ago was that we don't, right? Like that we want to only support the current maintenance policy. But in the past couple of months, things have changed again. And there are some additional discussions going on right now whether we need to adapt the policy again, or not again, but for the first time, or do we need to stick to our guns and say the policy is as is and we're not going to make changes. Each of those decisions are valid, I think. It's just where we as a company want to go to support our customers.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks for asking. Are there any other questions people want to go through before we return to Victor's rainbow dreams? No? Okay, super. Victor, where do you want to dive in?
Sure. So first question to Henry, like, why would smaller parts components help with getting closer to CD?
Yeah, so the current way how we deploy is that we tag all components at the same point in time so that they are, fixed with their versions, and we deploy this kind of fixed version package to our environment. But we can't do this very often because it takes a long time to build the packages and then to deploy it through all stages for all of those components. If we would have a way to just, let's say, we have a new GitLab version, so we just tag GitLab, and then a GitLab deployment is starting and it's rolling out independently, then that could be done much more often, right? And for smaller components, it could be faster. For things that take longer to deploy, of course, it would still take some time, but then not every little piece would wait for everything else to be finished. So that would speed up mean time to production for certain teams, for sure.
I see. Cool. Amy, do you have any target speed in your mind?
Like a couple of minutes? What can you do?
You said it fast, safe, automated. That's what I mean. And like, why can't we run more stages in parallel?
I mean, I'm sure we can. It's not something we've worked on. We'd have to figure out. It's pretty complicated. So because of the packaging, so we have a package and then we pass it through each stage out to production. So it's certainly something which we plan to figure out so that we can go faster. But we haven't yet spent the time to actually work out, like, how do we separate that out? How do we run things in parallel and then bring it back together in a way so that we know we can like safely deploy that out to production?
I do have an addition to that, Amy. That is one part. The other part is also dependent on our application, which is in which order can you actually execute things and what things can you safely run in parallel. So if you're talking about the environment level, theoretically, we could run multiple staging deployments and get different types of results. But what you actually do with that, with the information you gather in those stages to actually go to production, you still have a accumulation point in production, right? So that's on the environment level. On the actual level of GitLab installation, certain things can't go out of order. you can't deploy Gitly after you deploy Rails. Actually, you can, but you cause an outage. Then in certain cases, you can't even deploy, what was it again? I forgot now. Maybe someone from the team can correct me, but we are kind of tying when we are deploying prefect with Gitly with Rails. So the order needs to be executed in the right order, which then you can't actually parallelize that, right? Like it takes 20 minutes to do this and 10 minutes to do this, and right, and then you get already in half an hour. So if you kind of look at those two levels, like within one environment, you can only do a certain order because our application is very much monolithic. There is no loose coupling between the components. We don't version different components, or rather, in some cases, we do version them, but at the same time, we don't test compatibility between those different versions. So that's one level where we have a challenge, and another level is on the environments level, right? Like how things get to production, because you naturally need to have one point where things accumulate before they go to production, because if they only accumulate in production, you might get surprised in production instead of in other environments. So it's a multi-tier challenge.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, I understand that they accumulate in production, but do they accumulate as well at every environment? So as well, or you can?
Yeah, right now they accumulate in every environment, and this is the challenge we have, right? Like, because we get the result of an output of one environment, which is staging or canary in this case, to actually make a decision whether we go forward with the next environment. So that kind of naturally creates that order, and it makes it harder to parallelize a lot of these things. So the lower you are in the environment section, so if you have multiple pre-environments, for example, you can be loose with kind of what kind of decisions you make. But when you go closer to production environments, you need to have one environment at a time move.
Thank you. If anybody has questions outside of this, please add them somewhere to the doc, and we can skip this. But until then, I will move on with some more questions, like what tools would you use for the current process? I mean, because we can't solve the monolith approach, but if you can pick any tool, like you don't have to use auto deploy, you don't have to use Helm, nothing. Like what would be your truly preferred approach? You can use Argo CD if you want. I will be mad at you, but you can do that.
I have no opinion on this. This is a terrible question for me. Like, I don't think that tools are necessarily the limiter that we face right now. I think it's more the kind of complexity of bringing things together and getting them to production. But I don't know if anyone on the team actually has opinions on tools they'd like to be using.
I do not. However, the release tools that we've built has been a fantastic tool to utilize. If only it was, part of the GitLab application, perhaps. That could be kind of interesting. I think the nature of the fact that we have to talk to so many repositories and then need to coordinate between how we deploy to various environments and speaking to differing instances all makes this very complicated. And if there's a way that we could wire all of that together, that would make a lot of things a little simpler, I feel.
Just for me to understand, so the release tools that you built already, that's what you mean? That if that would be more built into GitLab, or?
Precisely, yes.
Yeah. Could you expand on this? Like what does it do? Because I try to catch up some of the notes, and I have my own opinion on what that is, but it could be way more interesting to hear it from you.
Release Tools is this amazing Ruby project that Robert, who is here on this call, has been developing a lot on, along with the rest of delivery, to start the process of a release from start to finish. So we send a chat ops command, which calls upon a rake task, which will reach out to 5+ projects to start the tagging, and we have a coordinated pipeline that it kicks off to manage that tag all the way from the process of building that tag into the omnibus and the CNG components that we utilize. We watch that coordinated pipeline go into staging. We watch for the results of QA, and then we send that all the way through to production. So there's a lot of work that Release Tools does to help us coordinate that and monitor the right things for us to know whether or not it's safe to proceed forward. There are always other things I would love to see Release Tools do, such as monitoring stuff, say, out of Sentry or Prometheus to make it more, say, automated by chance. This project is, it's going to be an ongoing project for quite a while. There's probably more that Robert could speak to in terms of, how it works and, what it does and such, but.
Yeah, it's definitely become kind of a catch-all of like, we need this piece of functionality, let's add it in Release Tools. So it does a lot of things. One thing I would really like to see, at least in the product, is kind of Release Tools currently relies on a lot of, I guess not just Release Tools, but we rely as a team on a lot of ChatOps functionality, and we're using the actual ChatOps GitLab products. And unfortunately, that kind of limits what we can do in Slack. Like, we can't do any kind of Slack interactivity. So we can't like say, I would like to see a message from the deployer saying, hey, this deploy finished to Canary, and it's baked. Click this button to move on to production. We can't do that at all right now because it requires a responsive endpoint from the ChatOps. So yeah, interactivity would be a big one for me.
Yeah, thanks. To either of you, how much, like, okay, let's assume that just configure team picks your Ruby code and puts it into GitLab as another component that you have to deploy together and have to take care of whenever you do your job. Is it usable by any other user? Can it, like, do you think it can be generalized to other users, like your home projects?
I think that there is nothing that is specific to Release Tools that can't be parsed out in a more generic form. And we are not the only company that's making a massive monolithic application. And we're not the only company that's making an application that also needs to be packaged in various ways. I think if Release Tools was ripped into its own product feature, I think that would be pretty awesome. It would take some work, obviously, because right now there's a lot of hard coding to go talk to GitLab or GitLab for this specific thing and go talk to Omnibus for this specific thing. But I do think there's room where we could make it more generic for other end users.
Thank you.
And take advantage of some of the features, right? So this year we've built in, kind of adjusted to take advantage of some of the new features coming out on GitLab. Like, that's the kind of goal as we, like, all the time, but particularly sort of as we go forward, is to reduce the complexity on our side as we figure out how to solve the problems of deployments and take advantage of new features coming in, contribute new features, and then pull these together so that, yeah, the goal is that everything we're using to do our deployments and releases is in the product so other people can use it too.
Thanks. I got the message, but I was too slow to type it down. Yeah, cool. Sean, you started to type another question, so I will stop here. And anyway, I'm done with my questions. So if anybody has something to add, feel free to.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was typing. I had a question specifically regarding. Give me 1 second. I guess services that are not managed by Omnibus. I'm not sure if this is the right area to ask, but they were looking for a defined process for informing self-managed customers regarding updates to standalone services that are not managed by Omnibus, specifically HA Proxy and PG Bouncer. They were looking for guidance from us as we suggested they use their own versions of those services. And so what they were asking was, what versions does GitLab use? We would like to know if when we should upgrade our services. Like, do we have a specific version they should use for PG Bouncer? What they're looking for is, vulnerabilities, exploits, things like that they should be aware of, and how they can go ahead and update that, because they currently do quarterly releases. And so they would like to know when they should do that and how. I think specifically they mentioned the NFS. We sent out some communications on NFS version 3 and version 4. It broke their GitLab cluster. And so they were looking to mitigate that and kind of have a defined process. They don't currently have one, so they would like to build one out, and they were wondering if we have a way of doing that, and if we could add that to either documentation or maybe like patch updates, the notes that we do. Not sure how we would do that, but that's what they're looking for.
I don't believe we have a process. Like, I think for these things, like how do these, are these things tied in with the reference architecture at all? Do you know, maybe Jason?
Honestly, I don't entirely understand exactly what the customer is looking for. I understand that they're doing relatively quarterly deploys, right? And they want to know which things to upgrade when, and then perhaps paths to do those upgrades.
Yeah, so specifically what happened was there was a Patroni vulnerability exploit, I think back in April or May. It was posted on Patroni's website and then on GitHub, and that's how they found it. And then they applied an update for that, but that exploit basically allowed an admin, someone to gain admin control to the cluster. And so then that cluster started filling up and it started failing over. Luckily they had 4, so they went ahead, or 5, they went ahead and shut it down, but it took them a while. They had to create an emergency ticket, and what they were saying was, how do we know when those exploits or vulnerabilities of those services that are not managed by Omnibus, but included in GitLab cluster and suggested, how do they mitigate that risk for vulnerabilities? Currently, they just go out, they have one person that goes out and looks for those updates, vulnerabilities, things like that, but they just don't have a way of getting that communication from us, right? Like we update our stuff and we know about those vulnerabilities, but I don't know if we share that with anybody, and they're just looking for guidance on that. Because what they did is they found that out, right? They were doing some testing before they upgraded, but what they were saying is if they hadn't done that, when they went to upgrade, they would have experienced that, and it would have caused them a lot more downtime than the normal 3 to 4 hours that they allot.
Okay. So what I'm actually going to say is I want to answer this question for you. However, that is actually bound to app security and distribution rather than the delivery team.
I can also add a bit more color from the infra side, just so we know where the gap is coming from. So our HA proxy fleet is managed by reliability teams, and we upgrade that when necessary, right? Like we don't necessarily have a clear process around it. It's not on a regular cadence and so on. It's more when an external event comes, right? Like a vulnerability or a necessity for a new feature. And for our customers, we don't include load balancers inside of our application for a plethora of reasons, but one of them being it's hard to package one solution, given that customers prefer to use their own load balancers for various other reasons. When it comes to the database itself, GitLab.com had to diverge at some point a couple of years ago from what we package within Omnibus or what we ship in general to our customers in order to stay ahead with the scale. At that time, we were having some database issues and we needed to move into more of a setup that you are recognizing right now, Patroni, PG Bouncer, and so on, which means that currently our infrastructure on .com is managed by the reliability teams separate from our product story. And that is one delta, large delta that we have. And we don't really know whether we'll be able to actually get to a common point, mostly because of different scales and different needs for .com versus self-managed customers. So this is where the gap is coming from. And this is why what we had on .com specifically is not necessarily tied into the processes that Jason is mentioning with the AppSec and distribution team.
Okay, thank you for that. That was their question, is can you basically just share what you do on .com with us? And I don't think that's something that we can do like 100%, right? I think we've been, with the reference architectures, we've given them as much as we can be transparent with them, but they were wanting full transparency for everything. Like, hey, when did you find this update? Okay. I can open an issue and discuss that with the team. I appreciate the answers. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks for asking. right, we're at time. So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for the questions and all the discussion items today. I hope you'll have a good rest of your day.